I love that you're creating an experience that is not only, tactile, that you feel when you sit down, but it's visual and you can taste it as well.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. There are venues that have become entrenched in the culinary history of Australia. Some with one owner that have stood the test of time. Others are standalone restaurants that, with the passion of multiple owners, continue to colour the culinary landscape. Brian Geraghty is a chef and owner of Berowra Waters Inn. Brian, how are you?
Very, very good, Anthony. How are you?
I'm good. It's great to get you on the show. You own one of Australia's most famous restaurants with an incredible history. What does that feel like?
It feels somewhat like you live up to expectations, but then also at the same time, you kind of got to do your own thing and feel it out and create the environment that you would like to create for it. But it is very interesting. Almost every diner has a historical story when they dine with you, be it from the 70s or the 80s or the 90s. So it's a very interesting place to work.
How do you strike that balance of sort of your obligation to the past and the incredible history that it does have, and wanting to do what you do as well? Is there a balance you need to strike?
I think that you need to pay gratitude and homage to the past and acknowledge it, but then also create your own story. I think everyone wants to go to a restaurant and feel as if there's a movement within the staff and the food and the experience, which they can actually feel is natural and organic. So it's to acknowledge that it's there, but also to write your own story. It's an interesting balance to strike.
It not only has an amazing history, but its location as well is quite fascinating too. Tell us a little bit about Berowra Waters Inn.
So effectively, it has no road, which that is its biggest kind of interesting point in regards to the location. And then also it can be rather problematic for logistics but it's what makes it amazing. And then the fact as well that Glenn Murcutt, who designed the building, obviously that is also quite a little feather in the cap. It's a very beautiful building to work in and to dine in. So it's very interesting to have almost from every position in the kitchen. You can see through a glass door or a window or the pass out to, the Hawkesbury River or, a sandstone cliff or wallabies jumping by or snakes, sunning themselves on the deck. So it's very Australiana.
Tell us a little bit about the logistics that you just briefly mentioned. You've got to get customers there, but you also got to get produce as well. What goes on to make it all happen?
So look, it's a labour of love, and I do the largest amount of it. So I would go to the markets, once or twice a week, and get all the fresh produce and the seafood as well. Just one day a week, I'll do that, and then for all the other deliveries, they make it up to the restaurant. But we need to kind of start running on Thursdays because we're open for Thursday's lunch, and it's when we get all the goods there. So can't kind of wait on a delivery for seafood to arrive to the restaurant at 11 when you're fully booked at 12. So it's hard getting it in, but it's also probably what most people, everyone's like, oh, it must be really, really hard to get it in. But probably the hardest part is getting the waste out. Like, yeah, well, it's more intensive. If you work at a restaurant in the city, you might, put it into the bin and then, wheel the bin to the rubbish room. Our rubbish room, you need to get the rubbish, get it down as small as possible, get it onto a boat, drive it up the Hawkesbury River, take it to, See, no one ever thinks about this one. Wine bottles as well, like you'd fit, or like sparkling water bottles. It's laborious. It's just things that aren't considered. And getting it in's hard, but getting it out's just as hard, if not harder.
Do the logistics sort of does that affect the sort of offering that you want to do, or are you pretty much able to do whatever you want?
No. We kind of work in a single sitting 32 seat capacity, and that's the way that the restaurant has to work. look, there's advantages and disadvantages to having such a small dining room, and I think one thing that you need to take into consideration is that it can't be scalable. We can't do, a big inner city restaurant turning tables and getting them in and getting them out. We are a labour of love for the clientele and for the kitchen. So like we are not cheap, we are not accessible, and we're not easy to get to. So everyone's made a journey. So we just kind of keep it as small as possible. But that's probably the way that I've always wanted to cook. So I think that's the best way for a restaurant to be.
You mentioned that many people that come to the restaurant have their own story of the history of the restaurant and the experiences that they've had. Give us a brief sort of history that you know of sort of the restaurant and the different operators that it's had.
So Genesis was in 1928. But it opened up as effectively a little tea house, fish and chip shop, and fuel. And it kind of made its way through the 30s and 40s into that position. Then in the late 50s, early 60s, it was purchased by a man of infamy who actually just passed away this week, Rocky Geraghty. So he was a former Australian boxing champion, and turned it into a somewhat Italian restaurant, serving spaghetti and lasagna. Yeah. And then that was colourful past. But then the trio of Gay Bilson, Tony Bilson, and Glenn Murcutt. Obviously, Glenn Murcutt being the architect, but back then he was wet behind the ears, 28. And same with Gay and Tony. They had decided to take something on. They wanted to do something very similar to the Waterside Inn. And when you see the parallels, I worked with Tony at Bilson's restaurant. So when you see the parallels between the Waterside Inn and Berowra Waters Inn, not only in the name, but also in the fact that, the Waterside Inn does have a road access, but it is very popular to make your way up the Thames and join in at the back of the restaurant. It is a bit of a thing which they really wanted to bring to Berowra Waters Inn. So they stripped out that building and built the dining room on top of the old sandstone foundation, and from there on, it was kind of struck into this restaurant of absolute infamy, globally. It's such a well-known and famous restaurant. It was kind of like the restaurant of the time for Australia and globally, just in regards to like cuisine and architecture. And Tony left in '84. And Gay kept running it until '96. She went off and opened another well-known restaurant named Benelong. Yeah. Then Martin Teplitsky took over in '96. So Martin Teplitsky was the old sous chef under Yanni and Gay. Yanni Christus, another well-known name in Australian food. Yeah, he went off and opened a restaurant named MG Garage. But then Martin ran it up until like the very late '90s. Then he sold it to the current owner, so Jeremy Laws, who is now my landlord. He ran it for a few years, and then Dietmar Sawyer, another well-known chef from Restaurant 41, he took it on and ran it for 4.5 years. And then I walked into it in 2012. Been there ever since.
It's such an extraordinary, iconic venue and full of history. How did you end up with the keys to the building?
So I was working with Tony at Bilson's restaurant, and unfortunately, even though we had 3 chef hats, we did manage to kind of go bankrupt, which was not an uncommon story when you're working at the high end. And in 2012, that was a terrible year for a lot of restaurants. There was a lot of restaurants in Sydney that didn't make it through that year. Balzac and Baccass, Bilson's. It was a pretty atrocious year that year. And I was just off doing my own thing. I wanted to reposition myself and figure out what I was doing, because I didn't really have a story. All I had was technique. I'd worked my way through France and London and America, and I was technically quite good, but I didn't really know what I wanted to cook. I just knew that I could. That might sound arrogant, a bit of hubris to it, but like technically, I had worked at a lot of restaurants, and I'd really knuckled down on my skills. So I just wanted to figure out what I was doing. I ended up taking a job at a bar. I was just working in a bar, and then Tony, in classic Tony style, just calls me up one day, 9 o'clock, and he goes, "Do you want to run Berowra Waters Inn?" And I was like, That's like, because like Tony is, yeah, that's just Tony's life. Like he was never really um, not moving on an idea. He was always moving. One thing to take from his life, it was an inspirational kind of character. But he was like, "Do you want to do it?" And I was like, "Well, I'm not doing much else." And I went out to. Well, I was just literally just working in a bar, and I went up there with him, with Jeremy, the owner, the landlord, and Tony and his wife and his kids. And there was also Robbie Faluna. He was out there as well. So he was the old restaurant manager from Bilson's. And it's like, we need to open this up in 3 or 4 months. And we did, but it was unfortunate. Tony couldn't see eye to eye with Jeremy on a few things. So Tony decided that it wasn't going to be the right fit for him, and he made his way. And then I gambled everything, and it appears like I won. So yeah.
Well, I want to explore everything you've been doing there and the challenges and successes that you've had over the last sort of decade. But take us back to when you were young. What sort of role did food play for you growing up?
I think this is a narrative that a lot of chefs kind of take. I'd love to say that I came from a rich Italian background where, my nonna was making pasta in the kitchen every Sunday, and, my dad was, rolling gnocchi or something like that. But it wasn't really like that for me. I just grew up in a rough end of town on the Central Coast, and I wasn't really that good at school. And I did want to challenge myself, and I was actually working as a kitchen hand, and this is how bad I was at school. It came to the end of year 9, and the teachers actually said that they probably didn't think it was the best idea for me to continue. They're like, "We don't really think this is working for you." And I mentioned that where I was working, and they're like, "Oh, if you want, you can jump in and be an apprentice, because we're going to need one next year." So that was it for me. And then I jumped in, and I realized that straight away, more than a love of food, it was the love of the environment and the action and the pressure. I really, really enjoyed that. I've always kind of said only diamonds are forged under pressure. So if you can, I used that to the best of my ability. And then by the time I started working at some serious restaurants, I really started to kind of understand that I did love what I was doing. But the genesis was just me. I needed an escape from a pretty atrocious school life, and I facilitated it with food, most definitely.
What were some of those serious restaurants you just mentioned where it's sort of the world of food sort of really opened up for you?
Short period of Tets, Bacchus, Astral, most definitely Astral. A little restaurant, which it was kind of on the landscape, then off the landscape. As quick as it came, it kind of went. But it was amazing working for a chef named David Pegram. He was the old head chef of Tets. Forbes and Burton. Yeah, what a great restaurant. Truly, what a great restaurant. So amazing to see what can be done with a small team. And then, I went on to bigger restaurants where I kind of realized then the bigger restaurants, the scalability of it is kind of challenging to be, a true artisan to food. Smaller restaurants are kind of really where it can all come together or it can all fall apart. Because you're not relying on massive finances or a beautiful dining room or a wine list as long as your arm with Chateau de Chems and Cornas from 1993. You need to have a small wine list and pretty knowledgeable front of house and very gifted chefs, and it's a lovely environment to work in, the smaller environments. But I kind of fell in love with that through working with Dave Pegram.
Do you have any stories of what it was like working with Dave?
Just an absolute laugh. Like truly, he was probably the first chef that really taught me that mentoring is really key. Because there's kind of this, and I've worked through these restaurants a lot where you kind of put into the pressure cooker to see how much you can handle. So it's like pretty aggressive behavior, or non-constructive words, that kind of very extreme fine dining mentality that a lot of chefs have. It's like I'm not sure as to whether that's really beneficial for the industry on a whole, but it gets you what you want instantly. But you get what you want instantly, but then maybe 6 months to a year and a half in, you might be looking for a new staff member, and then you need to go back to the beginning, where you need to find the right staff member again who's willing to do the hours, and then you need to retrain them. So there's nothing less valuable as a business owner having to consistently retrain people the same job that you taught someone 4 years ago because of your behavior. So I really learned that from Dave, that like he really just wanted to teach everyone as much as they could in the kitchen. Yeah.
You mentioned that Astral had a big impact on you. Sean Connolly was the chef there. What was he like to work with?
Great guy, really great guy. Good laugh, good Yorkshire lad, and his chef as well. He was from Newcastle. Tony Bilson, amazing chef. Really really good. It was probably the first time. That was the first restaurant that I worked at where I was like, okay, I think Europe's a go, because I'd done a bit of time in Europe. I was working at a restaurant in Dublin called Patrick Gibo, 2 Michelin star. But that was only because my partner at the time, she was studying overseas. So I kind of wanted to get over there as well. I didn't see the point in staying in Australia. So I'm Irish born. I was born there. I moved to Australia in '88. So it was very easy. She was studying in Boston, so I thought it would be easy if I was working and living in Dublin, and she was, studying and living in Boston. It's only about a 4-hour flight, so it's a lot closer than Sydney to Boston. So, there was like that 6 months where I worked in that restaurant, and that kind of really opened my eyes up. I came back and got to Astral, and then I was like, no, I'm definitely going back to Europe. So I made my way back over there. But if it wasn't for Sean and if it wasn't for Tony, I probably wouldn't have done that. I kind of realised back then, at least, because there was this great period in Sydney dining, which I'm sure you remember, where Bank had shut, and all of, not that that was that sounds facetious. That sounds facetious. Let me preface it. Bank shut, and then so many amazing restaurants opened after that. So Liam left and went back to Ireland. Oh, he went to South Africa actually, but then Assiette opened, Bacchus opened, Balzac opened. All of those chefs who now are just absolutely cemented in Sydney dining folklore. They just opened up these great restaurants. And I realised then, seeing they'd all worked in Europe, it was kind of like Australia was high school and Europe was college. And I needed to go to university. And I wanted to go to an Ivy League. So I ended up going to Pied à Terre in London. So
Take us into that kitchen. Do you have any stories of what that was like?
without a doubt, when it comes to the most formative years of my life, it was that period. So Shane Osborne, originally from Perth, just one of the most hardworking, dedicated, knowledgeable, compassionate chefs that I've ever worked for in my life. Technically second to none. I think everyone realised that. He did that Netflix show, Final Table, I believe. And my God, like every single test that was put in front of me, just absolutely annihilated it. Just such a gifted individual. But then a chef that's always in his kitchen, an owner who's always in the building, someone who was invested in investing in people. So he really taught me a lot. Such an amazing kitchen to work in, such great guys as well. Like really great group of men and women that were working in that kitchen. It was truly amazing.
You sort of made your way around the globe doing stages at various restaurants. Is there any sort of moment or experience that really stands out that sort of helped direct the path that you've gone on?
My staging life was probably one of the more lower points, to be frank. I realized that well, I suppose it's like silver linings and all that. I think if people are willing to work for free and dedicate a proportionate amount of time on this planet to help you get your dream over the line, be nice. You know? Yeah, that was probably one thing that I've like. I'm generally very good to my staff, and generally they're very good to me. I think that's a very important basis to learn, and I think that's probably one thing that I learned from my periods of staging, especially through France. That can be a nightmare. I did a service, my first service, and in Paris at La Restaurants for Pascal Barbeau, and for the few days that we opened up, the whole kitchen was speaking English, and I was, stupidly studying Rosetta Stone French. I thought like I kind of had the base skill enough to get over the line, and everyone was speaking English. And I was like, oh my god, this isn't going to be as bad as I thought. That wasn't until the first check of the first service came in, and then it instantly went from English to French faster than you could say samage, and like there was a hubris to it. Like they knew I was under the pressure, and then I'm starting to get yelled at for how long it's going to take to cook a scallop, and I'm trying to translate what they're saying in French in my brain, and then trying to translate it back to what it would be in English, and then trying to translate it back again into my mouth in French. And it was just like, it was atrocious, and I know what they were doing, and I understand why they do it, and it's just to see how much you're willing to take, because it's pretty hard to not work with dedicated people. So there's interesting ways to find out dedication, and I think that's what they were attempting to do. But it was a challenging day, to say the least.
What was it like for you when you came back to Australia?
Challenging. I went from pied-à-terre directly to quay, which was very different. Like pied-à-terre, we only had 7 or 8 guys working a service. You go to quay, you got 7 or 8 guys working a section. So it's it's really, really different. It's kind of one thing that you could always be thankful for working in a small 2 Michelin-starred restaurant in London is every single day we did the same amount of covers. It doesn't matter what day it was. So you're kind of like a little bit more manageable for your day, and you knew how much pressure you were going to be under. And then once you could handle that pressure, then that was kind of the base level. But when you walk in a quay, it's just like, oh, what are we doing tonight? Oh, we've got 180 people upstairs for a function, and then we're doing 210. Well, probably not that much. Maybe like 110 in the restaurant. It's like, oh, okay, we're doing 300 customers tonight, and it's very different, very, very different. So that was a little bit much for me at the beginning. And it wasn't the workload. It was just like I couldn't really do what I wanted to do. It was kind of like you were surviving every day. So then I made my way to Bilson's. That's where I met Tony. And that was very different. But Tony just had this. It was a big dining room. It would see about 80, and they'd turn a few tables. We'd probably do about 100 a service. But there was 12 of us in the kitchen, so it was manageable. And it wasn't lunch dinner. We only did lunches on a Friday, and every other day was dinner. So you could get in and get your stuff done and get boxed and get ready and kind of be happy with how the day was going to go.
Tony Bilson's influence on the culinary landscape was quite incredible. And he was quite an incredible and eccentric man as well. Do you have any stories of your interactions with him?
Yeah, he was very set in his ways, but at the same time an innovator, which is very interesting. It was a very interesting juxtaposition to work with the man, because he was kind of like, I remember he would always say, curry works with nothing. It's like, no, but it has to work with something, right, Tony? He's like, it works with nothing. And I was it's like, is this nouveau cuisine? I'm not too sure. I think the most amazing thing about Tony was that nothing was ever challenging for him. That was an amazing thing. He was always up for it. He's like, oh, we're going to open a restaurant at Low Wines. It's like, okay, Tony, let's do that. He's like, oh, we're also opening up in Shanghai. It's like, not a problem. We're kind of trying to run a 3-header here as well, man. He's like, oh, we're doing a function for Air France. It's going to be it's like, when is this in October? Like in a 4-week period. It's just like, okay, this is going to be challenging. I remember we Tony, Serge Dansereau, went to Indonesia with myself and Serge's head chef at the time, a fellow named Ben Amy, who's a really good guy, and we were doing degs for 1,000 people a night. It was insane. Yeah, I know. It was crazy. It was truly crazy. Like, never in my life have I ever experienced anything like it. It's like, yeah, I wouldn't even want to do that many customers. We do 10,000 customers a year at Berowra Waters Inn. It's like one tenth of our annual customers in a a 6 hour period. It was madness, but he loved doing it. He really loved getting out there and showing people what he knew and his skill set and his cuisine.
What did you take from your time with Tony Bilson?
I think an appreciation of the past, in regards to like showing respect to the past and being able to adapt that to your skill set and move it forward. Yeah, he was a character, that's for sure.
Talk to me about Berowra Waters Inn. When you first sort of took it over, how different was it back then when you started sort of creating your menu compared to what we see today?
Oh, look, I think that when you're in that first role, everyone plays it safe. Well, look, maybe not everyone, maybe just me. When I got there, I knew what worked, but I didn't have a story, right? Like, I didn't know what I wanted to cook. All I knew is that, like, oh, I've worked here and this works, and I've worked here and that works, and kind of like this, raw, steamed, fried, roasted, sweet kind of degustation view of everything. Do you know what I mean? Which is good. It's tried and tested, and it does work. But I didn't have my narrative. I was just kind of not only me, but like I think a lot of people that have worked at the restaurant, it's kind of like, is Berowra Waters Inn a French restaurant? It's like, well, by the intro that you made, this iconic Australian, destination, MCG like kind of lore about it, and then what are we going to, let's cook, Pont Neuf, Chateaubriand, and Briat Savran for cheese course. It's like, it doesn't really make sense. As much fun as it could be opening up a bottle of Chateau Neuf de Pape, you might want to open up, I don't know, like a beautiful Coonawarra Red. And it's like, is it a showpiece for Australia, or are we going to be running cheese cloches? So, unfortunately, because I wasn't old enough, or I didn't understand the landscape enough, and I just went with what I knew, which was very deep seating in French cuisine, and I kind of went down that road. And when you're looking at the Hawkesbury River, you've got just Hawkesbury sandstone all around you. You're in a tin roof building, sandstone base, designed by Glenn Murcutt, with all Australian architecture around, and deep and rich Aboriginal culture through the Hawkesbury. And you're cooking French food with tablecloths, and I'm like, it took me a few years to realize what I was doing, and I was doing it all wrong. And then I kind of switched it to this new all Australian understanding of what food is, which is a really hard question to pin down. Like, it's a very hard question. It's really, really hard to kind of find that answer. But, we're trying to do our best. We're soldering on through that question every single day, and even to this day.
How much have you changed and your food changed going on that journey?
A lot. I think this isn't the first time that anything's been that anything like this has been said. But a really good chef understands what doesn't need to be on the plate as opposed to what does. And then that's one thing that it takes a while to learn that, because it's kind of like it's the same as the first thing that I said about being French. You know what what works. It's like I'll bedazzle them with technical prowess, and it's like maybe people don't realize that all of those ingredients that you've just turned into, I don't know, a terrine would have been much nicer as a salad. Yeah, it took me a while to get my head around that. And I made things simpler and focus more on flavor, and probably focus more on the cooking of proteins as opposed to the garnish of proteins. And I think when it comes to the dining public, that's the most important thing. They really, if it looks good, that's amazing. But it's a secondary concern to the diner, because that's really for you. You know, that's oh, look what I did with this, and it's like, well, how does it taste? One thing Shane Osborne used to tell me was, and I didn't realize it until recently, or about 5 years ago. He'd say, "Cook as if everyone's blind." I was like, "Oh, okay, make it tasty." It's like, no. It's aesthetics is a secondary concern. Yeah, it takes time and understanding to get your head around that comment, but yeah.
Can you talk us through the menu a little bit? Is there a dish or two that sort of exemplifies what you're doing and where you're at with your food?
Well, look, I think when you come to the position where I have with where the cuisine is, I think the most important thing is that I've realised that, and this is just for me because people might find this a contentious point. Like I honestly believe that Australian food is built around immigration into Australia. I don't think that it's this deep, rich history that we have of ancient recipes that have been shared down generation from generation, or like provenances that only make a certain particular type of cheese, or this kind of like cultural backbone to cuisine. Like my partner, she's Swedish, and in February, for the end of Easter or the beginning, not too bad, being a bad Catholic, they eat this type of bun called semla, which is effectively it's like a cardamom brioche that's been cut out and hollowed and then filled with this like almond cream. And it's like it's delicious, don't get me wrong, but you can only eat it in February. They don't make it any other time of the year. Other parts of the world have this kind of like societal, cultural background to food, but for us, it has to be immigration. Like every single town seems to have a Thai restaurant, a Japanese sushi bar, a chicken shop, a church, and a liquor store. And it's like, and you don't see that in other parts of the world, because I've traveled around the world. Like it's so amazing, like the backbone that we have. So when it comes to things that are on the menu, I've kind of adopted all cultural backgrounds to try and figure out what Australian food is. One thing that hasn't making its way off the menu since its genesis in 2009 is effectively a chow and mushi, but built around Hawkesbury mud crab and then macadamia miso. So effectively, it's Japanese, to be frank, but with the right touches, it's moved its way out of that and then into the Hawkesbury and macadamia miso that we make in house. And it's very umami-ish and really rich. It's got this great sweetness and saltiness, this beautiful balance between the two, and the texture is fantastic, like silken tofu. It's really, really lovely.
You've got a restaurant that's not very easy to get to, and you certainly can't get there by car. The last couple of years, this podcast has detailed the sort of trauma and everything that has gone on to the restaurant industry. What sort of impact did it have on you and Berowra Waters Inn?
Well, look, I think is this pandemic chat? Is that the yeah? Well, look, I think we weren't afforded the opportunity that everyone else had to kind of do takeaway. Yeah, we weren't running veg boxes up and down the Hawkesbury River, nor is the Uber Eats on jet skis. So we were in a pickle. I think a lot of people were. We soldiered on through. We had a lot of support from a lot of great clientele. Like they just kind of knew the situation that we're in. They're like, "Oh, we'll just buy a gift voucher." I think there was one day we'd mentioned that we weren't obviously doing takeaways, but our online store is open, and you can buy gift vouchers, or we have an alcohol shop as well. A lot of kind of like takes on Australian classic international cocktails with an Australian twist, and they're like home delivered. I think in the first day we did like $20,000 worth of sales after just doing an EDM. Yeah, I know. It was crazy. It was almost a touch too much. So, cheers, guys. Thank you, but come on. We just soldiered on through. And I think one good thing was, though, due to the location, and as always, blessing and a curse, this kind of silver lining to it all. When you couldn't leave New South Wales, but you were allowed to leave your house, like, are you going to go to Martin Place to go for a meal, or are you going to go to Berowra? So we were lucky. As soon as we were able to open, my God, we were busy. But when we weren't allowed to open, so it was like 9 months out of a 2-year period, and when we couldn't open, it was pretty rough.
You've had the restaurant for over a decade now. How much have you changed, and how different are you compared to back then?
Very different, like, definitely. I think like a big aspect is, I think I've changed a lot because I have kids now. I didn't when I got there, and I think also when I got there, I really wanted to prove something, and it's kind of like this weird thing where I think a lot of people want to prove something to someone, and it's like, oh no, just prove things to yourself day by day. And it took me a very long time to do that. I think the more that I've proved to myself, the better the restaurant's got. I'm a more relaxed character as well. I'm not as intense or full on or extreme or as I used to be. I'm a lot better at being cool, calm, collected, and running it, as opposed to being erratic, high maintenance, and yelling. So I think, well, I do think that children do temper you in life. So, that's definitely been a big change as well.
Well, you're definitely creating another mark in history for this incredible venue at Berowra Waters Inn. What do you love about what you do?
I love that you're creating an experience that is not only tactile, that you feel when you sit down, but it's visual and you can taste it as well. It's lovely to be able to take people out of their life just for a very short period of time, and then just put them into an area where there's no phone reception. That is amazing. It's shocking seeing people almost have to relearn how to engage with people on a face-to-face basis. But it's truly lovely to be able to facilitate that and just create that environment, and then really just like write the narrative. I think with this all Australian thing, like trying to figure out what Australian food was, we also at the same time got rid of all foreign wine. So everything on the wine list, from the spirits to the beers to the soft drinks to the water, to the food that we source, to the farms that it is purchased on, they're all Australian. And I think that's really an amazing place to be creative, is painting yourself into a corner. Because, you might come up with an unbelievably great, oyster dish, and it's like, oh, let's get Colin Chablis or something along those lines, because it's mineral and it works well. It's like, yeah, because it's mineral and it works well, because it's always mineral and it always works well. So, but unfortunately, we don't have that in Australia. So we're going to have to find an Australian wine producer that's creating Chablis or non-oaked Chardonnay with the same amount of mineral drive, and it's challenging for everyone. But in that challenge, you find things that you never would have found before. We have wines on the wine list that are coming from Queensland. This is not really what most people are looking for, especially the dining public. But they're great wines, and same with the cuisine. Like, yeah, it would be great to be able to fly in some Kobe Wagyu, and but we can't do that because we don't have that here, because we're not in Japan. It has to be that all Australian menu and all Australian wine list, and from that you can actually find things that you'd never be looking for before. It's like you have to be most constructive when you're under pressure, right, to find the right answer.
Well, Brian, it's an absolute honour to chat with you today on Deep in the Weeds, and I know there's so much more to talk about. So please keep in touch, and we'll have to catch up again soon.
Yeah, no, most definitely. It's been an absolute pleasure.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep, Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.